All right, well, let's do the thing. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Community Conversations. As always, we are here for our series on communication, and we have Abbie Leavens here today to talk about poetry. We also have a couple of announcements. So if you're in Humanities 106, remember that you have reaction papers due on Tuesdays at noon. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about that. I also have an announcement from the Drama Club. So our Act One Drama Club will be presenting this year as an elegy, a poem written by a quiet stand artist, Jenny Chu. And the performance will be available on the rosecenterarts.com website starting tomorrow, January 29th. So I'll drop the link to that in the chat if you want to find out more about that. And that's a message from Betsy Richard, our drama instructor. And next week, I'm very excited to welcome another new speaker to our series. This is Melissa Johnson. Melissa Johnson teaches history here at LCC, and she's going to be doing a presentation on the Puritans and Me Too, looking at gossip and social control and communication in the 1600s. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, and I hope you are as well. But this week, we've got Abbie Leavens. And Abbie earned an AA from Northern Iowa Area Community College in 2004, a BA in Creative Writing from Waldorf College in 2009, and her MFA in English with a poetry emphasis from the University of California, Irvine in 2012. Her poems, short stories, and creative nonfiction has been published in a variety of literary journals, including Barnstorm, Bloom, The Boiler, Gargoyle, and elsewhere. I want to read Gargoyle. That sounds good. Midwest born and raised, she spent 5 years in Southern California before moving to the Pacific Northwest, where she and her family call home. She has previously taught at UC Irvine, Long Beach City College, and Fullerton College. She now teaches for the Language and Literature Department here at LCC and is the current faculty advisor for the Salal Review. Please welcome Abbie Leavens.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Oh, well, I am sure grateful to be here. Before we begin, I thought that I would invite you all to just breathe with me for a moment. Breathing is something that I have to remind myself to do from time to time, and something that I think is worthwhile to sort of reset ourselves. So this is just a really simple exercise. We breathe in for 4 counts. We hold it for 4 counts, or as long as you can, and then breathe out or exhale for 5 counts, okay? All right, here we go. Thank you. Okay, today I want to talk about poetry, one of my very first loves, and I just want to express my gratitude for sharing space with all of you and for showing up to have conversation with me around poetry and communication. And something that I wanted to say right off the bat is that some content may be upsetting or uncomfortable for some folks. And so I just wanted everyone to be aware. I think poetry is very personal. It can be very individual and vary from one individual to the next. So just be aware that we will be examining some poetic content today that might be alarming or uncomfortable for some folks. Okay, I would also invite you all to grab something to take notes with and or contribute to the chat today. As we move through the slides, I'm going to stop and pause for some moments of reflection. And I truly do want this to be more of a discussion versus a lecture. I want to be in conversation with all of you. So please, if you are so inclined, offer your thoughts as we move through today's presentation. And if you prefer to take notes on an old pen and paper, then that's perfectly welcome too. And I'll be reading from some of my notes as well, so forgive me for glancing back and forth. Something that I think is important to note is that we feel poetry I think sometimes when I talk to students and or colleagues, a common theme that I keep hearing is, I just don't understand it. I just don't get it. I don't know how to read poetry. And for me and for many others, we feel it before we really come to understand it. And I hesitate to even say that I completely know the true meaning of any piece of poetry, unless I'm of course the writer. And then even then, whoever is reading my poem is welcome to interpret and absorb and take what works for them and sort of change it in that way as well. So if some of you are maybe thinking, well, I don't understand it, I don't get it, I don't know how to do it, I would ask you to sort of try to put that away for just a moment and see if instead we can first feel the poem without trying to overanalyze it or get too worried about quote unquote doing it right. I think that we read it with our eyes, with our ears, and with our bodies. So poetry is a visceral art. And so rather than think of it again as right or wrong, I think we can think about it as a way for us to be in community with one another and to consider where you feel the connection, how you feel the connection, and when you feel the connection. And then once there has been a connection, and there won't always be, that's the other thing, there's so many varieties of poems and so many different poets and styles and things. So if there is a connection, then from there, then we can move to examine language choices and form, or maybe some other sorts of rhetorical decisions. I believe that poetry asks us to pay attention to the world around us, to keep our finger on the pulse, but so much of the world can be overwhelming and heavy and feel too big. I feel like we all can relate to that, especially right now. And so often poetry can be approached by zooming in on the small details, such as seeing water droplets on a flower petal, noticing, waking up to small moments as a way into the world. And then once we are there, exploring all there is to find. We try to hold the small against the large and the simple against the complex. As I said previously, there are lots of variations to poetry. Some follow strict rules, form, and form can be a useful tool not only for generation of material from the poet's perspective, but also a way to fit the sometimes messy pieces of our world into a more structured element. So, with that being said, let us begin. The title, I should have started there. Most of you can read. I'm imagining. Tell It Slant, Getting the News from Poetry. This is a riff, and I just outwardly stole two different poets, and these poets have been sort of stolen for a long time. And so the first poet that I want to talk about is William Carlos Williams, an extremely popular poet. William Carlos Williams was a Puerto Rican American poet, a writer, and a physician, pediatrics and family medicine, I believe. And this quote is quite commonly referenced. So this is actually an excerpt from Asphodel, That Greeny Flower. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. So I want us to think first about what is found there. So he writes, it is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And I would offer or ask you to offer your own thoughts about that phrase, is found there. What is found within poetry? What can be found within poetry? Do we have any participants in the chat?
Yes, we do.
What do they think?
Okay, so we've got emotional connection, we've got beauty, love, death, life, the energy of the living and the dead, the entire emotional spectrum of our lives, and truth.
That's amazing.
Thank you. But also silliness. No, stillness. Dang. Okay, but I think silliness too.
Yes.
Lived feelings, messages, signs, reflection.
Wonderful. Absolutely. 100%. A plus. Thank you so much. Those are wonderful. And silliness, I agree. Yeah, that's there in some poems too. Community, from my response, I have community, I have shared or recognizable understanding, emotion, gravity, humanity, the human condition. And so, yes. And so my next question is, do we lack? Do you all think we lack? What are some thoughts, Courtney? Oh, you're muted.
Right now I'm typing that I lack community right now.
Me too. And it's interesting, right? In some ways, with this virtual world that so many of us are now a part of, whether we've chosen to be or not, in some ways we have more community or opportunity for more community. And in some ways it's completely opposite. And so again, it's right now in our time, it feels so very individual, but also something that we as a society are all sharing at the same time. So it's strange. It's strange for me. And so I can only assume it's also strange for others. Okay, well, how about the next one? What is the weight of an individual or a community or the world? I mean, if we think about that for just a moment and we try to even imagine it like an actual weight, like a physical weight, it's heavy. It can be very, very heavy. And if I start with the world, it's too much. It's too much. So then I want to think about community. I want to think about myself, and see how I can use poetry and use others to sort of share in these experiences together. Okay, thank you so much for all of your responses. I really appreciate that. Emily Dickinson. I don't know if you've heard of Emily Dickinson before. Like William Carlos Williams, Emily Dickinson is a name that most of us are familiar with by now. And Emily Dickinson, let me get my notes here. There's a lot to say. But I will pull something I found the most interesting from, this is from the Poetry Foundation. Much of my material that I discussed today is from Poetry Foundation. I'll try to reference it when I can. And also there's a works cited at the end of the presentation, so please refer to that as well. But this came from the Poetry Foundation. I found it interesting. In the fall of 1847, Dickinson entered Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. Under the guidance of Mary Lyon, the school was known for its religious predilection. Part and parcel of the curriculum were weekly sessions with Lyon in which religious questions were examined and the state of the students' faith assessed. The young women were divided into three categories: those who were, quote, established Christians, those who, quote, expressed hope, and those who were, quote, without hope. Much has been made of Emily's place in this latter category, and the widely circulated story that she was the only member of that group. The only member of the group without hope. I don't know. Further down it says, the solitary rebel may well have been the only one sitting at that meeting, but the school records indicate that Dickinson was not alone in the without hope category. In fact, 30 students finished the school year with that same designation. So this is Tell All the Truth, but Tell It Slant. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Now, truth be told, this poem was one of the first poems that I felt, that I absolutely connected with. The whole thing just made sense to me. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. And then the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. If we think about truth dazzling gradually, first of all, I love the sounds of those words together, but also a gradual dazzle. I love that image that it conjures for me. That we need to come to things slowly, or we will be blind. We will be able to or we won't be able to see it, right? Whatever that it is, which is the truth in this scenario. So if I think about COVID-19 and I think about the ways in which we're moving and living in the world right now, I don't think it was a gradual dazzle. I think it was quite the opposite. And I certainly feel that in some ways it was hard for me to see, and still is hard for me to see and hard for me to understand so much of what is going on. I've been in conversation with people who say, well, things just happen to me now. And we say, okay, well, this is what's happening today. It's less of a choice, perhaps, and more of a reaction. And so I digress a bit, but coming back to that idea of the truth must dazzle gradually or every man be blind, I think is very interesting and very intriguing to think about. So truth with a capital T. Everyone has truths. And so I would like to know what some of yours are. And I would also invite you to consider how your truth is similar to and different from other people's truth. And then one more, what can understanding others' truths offer? So please feel free to just reflect on these in the chat as well. And I'll offer some of my own truths for some example. So some sort of surface level truths about me. I was born in the Midwest, born in Iowa. I am married. I am a mom of 2 boys. I'm an educator. These are all things I consider truths about myself. Now that's sort of more of a surface level truth. You can Google and pretty much find out a lot of that information now. However, getting a little bit deeper, I do identify as queer. I'm a high feeler. I have loads of anxiety. I always have. And I am sometimes impulsive. I can be compulsive, particularly about my work. When I really invest myself in something, we say things like we go all in, right? So these are a little bit deeper truths about myself. And people who know me, my friends and my acquaintances, sometimes get to know those truths, but a quick Google search may or may not show those truths. And we could keep going and getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that sometimes poetry can be a way for us to reflect and expose our truths. So I'm curious, what are some things that you all had to say?
We've got truth is the difference between facts and opinions. Sometimes I feel like, I'm just reading these, sometimes I feel like I am autistic. For me, I'd say I'm overwhelmed and struggling at times.
Yeah.
That's a truth I feel right now. Truth in this context makes me think about our identity and worldview. Another truth, when I play a sport, I forget what I am doing and just let my body move instinctually.
Hey.
I am tired.
Yes. There's no fatigue like Zoom fatigue. But there's other kinds of tired. I'm not trying to make light of the situation. I think a lot of us have a lot of weight that we're carrying right now. And so exhaustion is definitely a truth. Yes. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. The next slide is Amanda Gorman. Maybe you all have heard of her by now. If not, let me introduce you to Amanda Gorman. Amanda Gorman is the youngest inaugural poet in United States history, as well as an award-winning writer and cum laude graduate of Harvard University, where she studied sociology. She's written for the New York Times and has 3 books forthcoming with Penguin Random House. So I want to go to her page, but before we go to her page for just a moment, I'm curious and I'd like you all to reflect on what is some language we might use to describe a United States presidential inauguration. If you think of that as an event, I mean, it is an event, but think of the event. What are some vocabulary words that come to mind when we think about a presidential inauguration?
We have ceremony, historic, change, tradition.
Wonderful.
Pomp and
I'm sorry, what?
circumstance. Pomp and
Circumstance.
circumstance.
Yes, lots of that.
Dignity, integrity, celebration. Betsy says humorless. The true meaning of being American. Excitement, change, transition.
You're all a bunch of poets. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I agree with much of what was said. I wanted to very quickly, go to this page to show you where I got the information for one, but also to invite you all, if you are so inclined, to visit it yourself and to learn more about Amanda. She's quite successful. And then, of course, there's opportunity to buy her work again, if you are so inclined. The Hill We Climb, which is the poem that she recited at the presidential inauguration, can be purchased. Courtney, I think we established that it is pre-purchased for now, but even so, I wanted you to be aware of that resource. Okay. So we do not have time to read the entirety of the poem, but I decided not to have us read the entirety of the poem, but I would suggest that you all take a minute and Google it. Maybe not right now, but when you can, if you have yet to hear her read the poem. So if you've already watched it, then you've watched it, you've experienced it, you know. You could always review it again. But if you haven't, I do think it's definitely worth a view. This is just one excerpt from many words, many pieces of language that she chose to use. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to form a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And again, that's just one excerpt. So if we think about language, we think about vocabulary, some vocabulary that sticks out to me right away is pristine, form a union, perfect. We've heard these words many times before. Form a union, purpose. This is maybe a bit new. To compose a country committed, and cultures, colors, characters, and conditions. Those are the specific vocabulary words that stick out to me there and that I like to reflect on. And I think it's worth considering the entire poem against our sort of earlier notions about what sort of language we expect or what language we think a presidential inauguration represents to us, and seeing if there's anything that we can find that we can connect to, that we can relate with within the words that she speaks. Okay, so which truths are addressed? You can reflect, you can answer in the chat, or you can just use these for sort of a homework question. Here I am giving out homework. What can be learned about societal truth from a poem like The Hill We Climb? Does the performance aspect shape or alter the truth? So this is something I'm reflecting on, I'm curious about. Amanda Gorman knew that this poem would be recited at this particular event. And so I wonder if that then changes, shapes, guides, alters the particular truths that are found within. And my last question for reflection would be, have there been truths omitted? So again, If you have thoughts now, they are welcome, but I also just offer it as a piece of reflection. The next poet I would like to discuss is Claudia Rankine. A little bit of background from, again, Poetry Foundation. Born in Kingston, Jamaica, poet Claudia Rankine earned a BA at Williams College and an MFA at Columbia University. Rankine has published several collections of poetry, including Citizen and American Lyric, and many others. Her work often crosses genres as it tracks wild and precise movements of mind, noting that, quote, hers is an art neither of epiphany nor story. Critic Calvin Bedient observed that Rankine's style is the sanity, but just barely, of the insanity, the grace, but just barely, of the grotesqueness. Discussing the borrowed and fragmentary sources for her work in an interview with Paul Legault for the Academy of American Poets, Rankine stated, quote, I don't feel any commitment to any external idea of the truth. I feel like the making of the thing is the truth, will make its own truth. So I find that to be interesting as well. Now, I own a copy of this text. Something that I find to be very valuable as an educator is that Grey Wolf Press and Claudia Rankine have offered many resources on the greywolfpress.org on their website. So if you are curious about learning more about this text, if you have not been familiar with this, I would encourage you to check that out. It is sort of a hybrid of poetry, nonfiction, and criticism. And so again, she's sort of bending genre and manipulating that to create truth, to express truth. She doesn't care about the external concepts of truth, as she has said, but that doesn't mean that we still can't glean that from it. And so Citizen narrates many instances of microaggressions, individual acts of racism that collectively form the crushing experience of racism in America. And that's again from Grey Wolf. And this is one of the discussion questions that's also offered on the website. Referring to Serena Williams, Rankine states, yes, and the body has memory. The physical carriage hauls more than its weight. And I just think that quote is wonderful. Yes, and the body has memory. The physical carriage hauls more than its weight. How do sports in particular encourage spectators and officials to assume influence or even ownership over the bodies of the players? And does this have parallels to other arenas of American life? Now, I didn't make this discussion question, but it was pre-made, and I think it's wonderful. I think it's worth thinking about. So what do we think? Does anyone have any immediate thoughts, or do we need to spend a little more time again reflecting?
I will note that Betsy points out there's an audiobook of Citizen, which may offer some interesting intersections of your previous question, if performance changes, alters, or enhances the truth.
Thank you, Betsy. Brilliant. I also noted from the discussion questions, number 12, again from Grey Wolf, says, what associations does the image on the cover of the book bring up for you? Is it surprising that the work of art it depicts, In the Hood by David Hammons, was first exhibited in 1993? And how does In the Hood relate to the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012? What does this seemingly disjointed time frame say about the deadly effects of racism in America? So I would also offer that for thought, for consideration. Anything else before we move on, Courtney? Not right now, we're okay? All right. James Wright. James Wright from Poetry Foundation was frequently referred to as one of America's finest contemporary poets. He was admired by critics and fellow poets alike for his willingness and ability to experiment with language and style, as well as for his thematic concerns. Further down I liked this depiction. Wright's early poems, especially those in his first two volumes, are, quote, too literary, too subservient to the poems and poets of the past. Other critics noted the elaborate rhymes, complex rhetoric, and traditional use of imagery in these early efforts. But as Wright began to experiment, he loosened his forms, that's quoted, and, quote, whittled rhetoric to a succession of intense perceptions. So if that's another way to say we should pay attention to things around us. And then finally, Wright has been acknowledged by a generation of poets as the artisan of a new language for poetry, a style of pastoral surrealism built around strong images and a simple spoken rhetoric. Wright's art lay not in complex grammar, but in a stark structure of perceptions which become their own statement. And so this is Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm in Pine Island, Minnesota by James Wright. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. So what I would ask us to consider about James Wright, particularly that poem, is how we can use place to share our truths, or how can we use place to share our truths? And place as a physical location, but also place as a state of mind. So where is your place? And I would invite you to reflect on that a little bit as well. Physical location is usually the easier one. Where are we geographically? And then where are we right now within our mind?
We've got some responses. Lost. Are we in a good place or a bad place? The best place, deep in the woods. Nature.
Awesome. Thank you. Can the bad place be a good place? Can the good place be a bad place? I mean, I think yes. I hope yes. And I like to be in the woods as well. The actual woods. I like this quote over here too about Wright's work being despair and celebration, ritual damnation and ritual salvation. I think we can be both. Okay, Ocean Vuong. Born in Saigon, poet and editor Ocean Vuong was raised in Hartford, Connecticut, and earned a BA at Brooklyn College. In his poems, he often explores transformation, desire, and violent loss. So we will let Ocean read his poem for us. I would ask you to note the information here because he does not read this. I find it pertinent. South Vietnam, April 29th, 1975. Armed Forces Radio played Irving Berlin's White Christmas as a code to begin Operation Frequent Wind, the ultimate evacuation of American civilians and Vietnamese refugees by helicopter during the fall of Saigon.
Obad with burning city. Milk flower petals on the street, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. He fills a teacup with champagne, brings it to her lips. Open, he says. She opens. Outside, a soldier spits out his cigarette as footsteps fill the square like stones fallen from the sky. May all your Christmases be white as the traffic guard unstraps his holster, his hand running the hem of her white dress, his black eyes, her black hair, a single candle, their shadows, 2 wicks. A military truck speeds through the intersection, the sound of children shrieking inside, a bicycle hurled through a store window. When the dust rises, a black dog lies in the road, panting, its hind legs crushed into the shine of a white Christmas. On the nightstand, a sprig of magnolia expands like a secret heard for the first time. The treetops glisten and children listen. The chief of police face down in a pool of Coca-Cola, a palm-sized photo of his father soaking beside his left ear. The song moving through the city like a widow, a white, I'm dreaming of a curtain of snow falling from her shoulders. Snow crackling against the window, snow shredded with gunfire, red sky, snow on the tanks rolling over the city walls, a helicopter lifting the living just out of reach, the city so white it is ready for ink. The radio saying run, run, run. Milk flower petals on a black dog, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. She is saying something neither of them can hear. The hotel rocks beneath them, the bed a field of ice cracking. Don't worry, he says, as the first bomb brightens their faces. My brothers have won the war, and tomorrow the lights go out. I'm dreaming to hear sleigh bells in the snow. In the square below, a nun on fire runs silently toward her God. Open, he says. She opens. Obad with
Okay. That one's a lot to sit with. I think that we can consider from this poem, particularly truth of experience, but also truth of memory, also truth of repetition. Mixtape or mashup as a poetic technique that you could use to address difficult situations, complex situations. The cadence and the rhythm of the song interwoven with the poem elevates the truth in an interesting way, in a unique way, and in a devastating way, in my opinion. I think we can also use familiarity and nostalgia as a rhetorical device. So if you're feeling a connection, I think that it's worth sort of stealing, not outwardly stealing, but stealing technique from Ocean Vuong, and trying out some different things with your own writing if you feel so inclined. Does anyone have any reflection or thoughts on that?
Betsy commented that it illustrates how the spoken word is so different than the written word. Perhaps because I am a performer, my truth is that poetry wants to be spoken and heard.
I like that, Betsy. I agree. It's such a different experience. I feel like there's space for both in certain situations. Sometimes, of course, we can't hear. I prefer to hear it from the artist, certainly over myself reading it when possible. But I still think that there's good value in reading it aloud and hearing it and being able to feel it, and the words and the language do such different and interesting things from our eyes to the page, from our mouth to our ears. So 100%. Okay, Joy Harjo. Joy Harjo is an internationally renowned performer and writer of the Muskegee Creek Nation. Please correct me if you know the correct pronunciation. She is serving her second term as the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States, and that's from joyharjo.com. Do we have comments? No? Okay. Oh, Joy Harjo is she's so wonderful. She does so many things. And one of those things is gathering the work of more than 160 poets representing nearly 100 indigenous nations into the first historically comprehensive Native poetry anthology. It is produced by Norton, and it's a landmark anthology which celebrates the indigenous peoples of North America, the first poets of this country, whose literary traditions stretch back centuries. And so I encourage you all to check that out. It's called When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through. This particular poem that I'd like us to listen to is quite well known, so maybe you are familiar, but it is An American Sunrise.
An American sunrise. We were running out of breath. As we ran to meet ourselves, we were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional and did, and some of us could sing. So we drummed a firelit pathway up to those starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with a Pueblo as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We know the rumors of our demise. We spit them out. They die soon.
The reflective elements for this piece, for me, are what are some truths we're ashamed of? Individually, as a society, as a world. What is the power in telling all the truth and writing it anyway? Listening for other writers' truths can elevate our understanding. I believe that poets are here for us to discover, and poetry is everywhere if we look. And I wonder whose truths you do not yet know. Personally, there are a whole bunch of truths I do not yet know. I don't know that I will ever know all of the truths. And so being curious and being open and being intentional in my discovery of various poets and different poets, particularly poets who have differences from me, is really important to be able to share in community, to be able to really understand. And personally, I want to understand because I think there's value in that shared understanding and humanity. It doesn't mean assimilation, but it means a better understanding, a better awareness. And so much about poetry is just being aware, just paying attention. So if you feel so inclined to share about some truths you might be ashamed of, feel free to do so.
I'll get the ball rolling on this one. As a historian, there's a lot of poetic traditions that we use to share stories that don't necessarily get recorded as traditional history. So if you think of things like the Iliad or the Odyssey or the griot tradition in West Africa, and I think Joy Harjo fits really well into that. And there's a lot of discomfort in our history, and we don't like to face that. Let's see. Chris says, ashamed of my privilege, and especially when I don't see it. We can never know all the truths. Katie says, some truths that we as a society are ashamed of, or that many people are things like mental health, weight, sexuality, and so on.
Yes, thank you. Personal truths of my own have to deal with, addiction, going back to the whole idea of impulsivity and compulsiveness. There's good and bad with just about everything. It has to do with, some family history and both known and unknown. The stories I've been told, and those stories I haven't been told, or those stories we don't talk about at the dinner table, right? So I think, again, we can evaluate this or reflect on this as an individual, as a society, and sort of as a world or a global worldly view. So thank you so much for your input. I wanted to take a moment and say we have a vibrant literary community. We are so fortunate. We have a lot of places we can go to find poetry. So if you're like, well, I want to know more and I want to read more and I want to think about more of these things, the good news is there's lots of ways to do that. Northwest Voices, something we have here at Lower Columbia College. I invite you to learn more about the program and to get involved with that. We bring writers to campus and they share with us their stories and their poems, and it's a way to enrich community. The Salal Review, not afraid to plug it here. Please, if you are an artist, unfortunately our literary submission window has closed for this year, but if you are a visual artist, we are still open for visual art submissions until February 5th. And even if you aren't going to submit or you don't have anything to submit, you could still enjoy it. It is free. I have lots of copies in my office from last year. They're beautiful. Well, I'm biased, but I think they're beautiful. And so let me know if you would like your very own 1 or 10 copies. I have them. Powell's Books is not far away, but I would also at this time offer and ask you guys, please contribute any place within the Longview, Kelso, or within your own communities where you find poetry.
I'm going to take a moment now. I think, Abbie, if this is right, we're going to open it up and see if we can hear people's voices and maybe even see you. I don't know. So I'm going to click on the participants to give them the option to talk if they want.
Should I stop share?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, I see squares.
Yay, it's working. Thank you, Jenny, for teaching me this like 20 minutes before we started today.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes. Don't everybody run away now, okay?
Okay, looks like Sean has a question.
Hi, Sean.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Um, yeah, I mean, I lived in Europe twice, and yeah, I lived in the Midwest when I was in the military, Fort Riley, for about 6 years. So, just about everywhere around the world. So, the thing is, what I've noticed is that truth is, especially now, but even previously, it's being weighed upon a scale and not being shared. Um, and that really goes deep because it says a lot about how we know that there are known unknowns and unknown knowns, but it's that we have to be able to decipher them for the benefit of all. And I, it hits home for me. I've been, like I said, 6 different deployments, and I got to see the world as it is. And and it is truth, and it is truth that the difference between fact and opinion, especially now, that in that poem that Amanda's had, that's she said it at the inauguration of President Biden, is that it shouldn't be perfect that we're looking for and striving for. It's that there's purpose, and we always talk about there's purpose behind the meaning of what you're trying to say, but it's not perfect. And to have that, as like Rod Serling used to say, that veil that's not there of perfection, but it's that it's perfect. I mean, of purpose that we should be striving for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to jump in on that a little bit, the inaugural poem really hit on some very interesting riffs on the Declaration of Independence, and to talk about, in order to form a more perfect union, that hits home, especially at a context like the inauguration of a new president at a time when it was really uncertain what that was going to look like, and the threat of violence and everything. That was powerful. That was very powerful.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you both. I'd invite anyone else who wants to just share some of their truth. Maybe you scribbled some lines down. You were feeling, I don't know, inspired or moved to write something. We'd love to hear it. Or if you just have a comment or a question, that's also okay.
I wrote in the chat that what I keep covering. This is Chris, by the way. Hi, Abbie.
Hi, Chris.
The line from Yeats's "The Second Coming" is the one that a professor of mine shared with me the day after the 2016 election. And it was the only line I wouldn't have thought of when he said, "Oh, I think of that poem, The Second Coming." And so I was thinking about all those lines about chaos. And he said, "No, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity."
Mhm.
And he wrote those lines over 100 years ago, and they're really true right now. And they're even more true now than they were in 2016, when actually it's 2015, right? Because it was the day after the election. So, but great job. I learned 2 new poets, and Joy Harjo. You read Joy Harjo, I almost started crying. That's awesome.
She's so phenomenal. I keep learning more and more, and I can't wait to continue learning more. But yeah, it's so interesting to me how it transgresses time.
We have a comment from Lindsay in the chat that says, "This is just what I needed today. Lovely presentation. Thank you, Abbie."
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. You're the best. Anybody else? Any other thoughts, truths?
I'll echo Lindsay and say one thing that I think we all need right now, or at least I certainly need, is this connection and the arts. And that's one of the things that's keeping me going at this point. And that's music, that's poetry, that's visual art. That's so many things. And it's really great to be able to hear you know, as Chris said, to get some new recommendations on writers that I want to look at. And thank you, Abbie, for sharing your thoughts here with us today.
Of course, I couldn't agree more. Please keep creating things. We need creators. We need art. We need humanities.
Lots and lots of thank yous and yeses and here's in the chat right now. That's nice to see.
Well, you're
and I want to thank our audience members for coming and joining us and participating. This one asked you to do some work, and that was lovely to see people getting in on that. And, you know, I was worried that this whole community conversations thing might not make it in the online format, but it really looks like it is. And that, you know, makes my soul sing a little bit, which is always nice. And I think we're about out of time.
All right. Thank you, Courtney.
So thank you, Abbie, for guiding us through this. Thank you to everyone who came and sat in and participated. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I hope to see you all next week as well. Take care, everybody.
See you later. Be well.